Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We made it through another week, and I can't wait to see all of you in the chat this week and also next week as well. I'll be hosting the Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge, which is going to be super exciting. So, a big hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever it is in the world, to everyone joining me here on Behance. If you are tuning in live, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got David and Phil and Panos and Brett, Cody, Adriano, Sarah, and Sydney, Lauren, Munir, Anita from Toronto. Great to see everyone from all over the world. I love these things. Wade, great to see all of you. All right. So, what are we tackling today? Well, last week, we started the process of designing a manga and comic inspired, that's the word I'm looking for, design for the web. Browsing experience, premium experience, that sort of thing. So, let me hop over to my screen, and before we dive into XD, if you're new to XD, these masterclasses are a little bit more advanced than some of the typical classes that we host, but if you're new, head over to letsxd.com. A lot of information there, including a wonderful series by my good friend and colleague, Danny Beaumont, right here under Getting Started. Then you can start reading up and watching about 3D transforms, scroll groups, stacks, the whole 9 yards. Videos from yours truly, and also some great guides by Matt Ray as well. So letsxd.com, great resource if you're learning XD. All right. Let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD, and this is what we landed on last week. So we started to build out this landing page. This is the home screen for this particular manga or comic service, whatever. You can take it in whichever direction that you're looking for. And we have a few sections on this particular design. You know, we've got this navigation bar at the top. Let me go ahead and close these groups. We've got a navigation bar at the top. We've got some links, search over to the right over here. Little user icon, we may turn that into a drop down at some point. We've got some tags, some common tags right here at the top as well. And then we have some featured sections. So we have featured books for this week and then hot off the press. So maybe these are new, right? And we started the process last week as well, creating hover states. And what I showed you last week is that even if you're using a repeat grid, you can put these hover states inside of them. And what I like to do personally is, actually this one's a stack, but you can use a repeat grid as well, is just create the hover effect as a separate layer. So you're noticing over here to the left, we have our main component for this hover state, and it's really just a few layers, right? We have our default state where nothing is shown. Then we have our hover state. And if we dive into the layers, we just have a bunch of, objects here. This is a gradient in the background. We have some buttons, text layers, more tags and things like that, right? So I've always found that it's a decent practice to just create your hover effects as separate layers, especially if you're using a repeat grid. That way you're not really destroying some of the functionality of a repeat grid, and you can still have your hover effects work as expected, right? So today we're going to start the process of adding a few extra little goodies to this homepage, and then we're going to start working on some additional pages as well for this experience. And if anyone in the chat has questions throughout the stream, definitely throw them in. I am taking a look. We've got Sydney from Kentucky, possibly, I think. And we've got Munir from Istanbul. Who else do we have in here? People from all over the world. Kara, great to see you. And Marcia, Samuel, great to see you as well. All right, so here we go. What I'm thinking now is I want to do a few things on this homepage. One, I want to bring a little bit more attention to these tags at the top. And for that, we're going to get a little bit creative. What I'm thinking is we're going to have a fun rainbow overlay right here, right? How's the hoverboard so Sarah's asking, how's the hover prototype? So this one right over here, it's basically it's two states, right? So we have our default state, which has all the layers, but all the layers are set at 0% opacity. And then we created a hover state by pressing the plus button over here and then choosing hover state. I can't do that now because I already have a hover state. And then within that hover state, all you have to do is just turn the layers back up to 100% so they're visible. right? And hover states are automatically wired up by default, so you don't have to do anything extra unless you want to change the transition, which I believe we did last week. So for the hover state, we just change it to, instead of auto animate, we just went for a simple transition with no animation. That way there's not a little bit of a delay as the layers are being animated, right? So when you do hover, you can just hover instantaneously and they all appear, which is great. All right, so back over to our tags at the top. Again, I'm thinking to have a fun little rainbow overlay, just to bring a little bit more attention, just to add a little bit of color to this. Now, I thought about the right way of doing it, right? You can, of course, dive in here and change the color of the text layers individually so you get this kind of rainbow feel, right? However, we can also utilize an overlay or just a layer on top of all these layers, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag out a rectangle across this entire group of tags. Now I want to make sure, let me just change the fill just for a second. I want to make sure, because we have this shadow right down here, it's a pretty large soft shadow. I want to make sure that this rectangle that we just created is over top of that shadow. And I'll show you why that's important in a moment. So on this rectangle that we just created, we're going to add a gradient overlay, right? So I'm going to go ahead and open the fill dialog box right here at the bottom, and I'm going to change it from solid color to linear gradient. And I want a gradient going from left to right over there. Let me zoom in here so you can see exactly what's going on. There we go. And now I want to start that process of adding some colors to this. So I'm going to start with the color on the far left-hand side, and I'm going to choose a nice pinkish red color somewhere right around there. And maybe we'll go for a blue, and I'm just adding stops by just clicking on that area at the top, right? And then we might want to go for a green, and then maybe a yellow. And I'm just going through and just setting these colors, make this a little bit more vibrant, this one as well. And then finally, the last one will just end with a nice red at the side, right? There we go. So I'm going to make sure to move these so they're lined up relatively well from each other. Just like that, all right? Now, of course, we can't see the tags underneath this layer that we've just created. So what we're going to do, we're going to start experimenting with some blend modes. Now, the most common ones that we would probably use in a situation like this: overlay, soft light, hard light, screen as well. Cara is saying, if it wasn't for finding Howard's XD daily challenges last year, I wouldn't be studying to become a UX designer now. That's amazing, Cara. I'm really glad that you and many others are benefiting from our challenges. And next week, I'm going to be running the next set of challenges. I think I'm also running one in March. And I've got a little surprise planned for next week's challenges. So stay tuned for that. I think you're all going to like it. So let's experiment with some of these blend modes. Overlay, what does that look like? Not bad, right? Soft light, okay. Hard light might be a little bit too much. Yep, not gonna work. Screen, aha, now we're getting somewhere, right? So I'm not gonna go into, because honestly, I don't understand exactly, but I'm not gonna go into the details on how blend modes work. It's a lot of mathematics, and I'm terrible at math. So, you know, in a sense, something like screen, for example, it's allowing those colors to kind of seep through while also cutting out the white from the layers behind it. So, and that looks pretty good, right? And I can dive in here and make changes to this pink if I wanted to. And all of a sudden we've got this fun gradient kind of going across. And this is why it was so important to make sure that this rectangle is covering the shadow, because if it wasn't, right, we can see this harsh line going across where the shadow is. But if I just make it a little bit larger, we can very easily see that it covers everything up. And we have a nice gradual gradient now going across, right? So if I turn off the blend mode, turn it back on, it's pretty good, right? You can also experiment with things like object blur. If you want to make sure that the gradient is, you know, really nicely gradual, you probably won't notice a huge difference, but it's there. In certain cases, it'll definitely make a little bit of a difference, but for the most part, probably don't need it for now. All right, so we've tackled some of the tags, and now what I'm thinking for the next section of this homepage is, since this particular service might have a premium feature or a subscription plan, we might want a nice banner at the top to call that out. Now, what I definitely want to do is set this up so that as I'm adding new elements to this particular project and homepage, everything moves around and rearranges itself as you would expect. So what I'm going to do now, I have all these. I'm going to make sure to pop this. So we have our navigation. I'm going to move to the top. We have our tags right here. I'm going to pop this rectangle, which I'm going to call overlay, directly into this group, just like that. So everything's nice and organized. I'm going to move this up to the top as well. We've got our series and we have our featured section right here, right? So with all this content, we want to make sure that we can rearrange things, and also it's going to also rearrange as we're designing. So I'm going to select all three of these groups, genres, which I'm going to actually call tags. We have our series and we have our featured. Select them all, hold down your shift key, click on them. I'm going to go Command and Control G to pop them into a group, and I'm going to just call this content. Now, the benefit of this is that now all of this is inside of a group. Over within the Properties Inspector to the right, I can turn on a stack, and it's automatically define this stack as a vertical stack, because the content is going top to bottom. I do want to show you something kind of cool, right? Let me actually undo this. I'm going to dive in here, and this featured section, you know, we already have it in a group, but I'm going to actually ungroup this, and I'm also going to ungroup the cards so that they're kind of floating. So we have one card here, right? And another card here. This is kind of cool. So when a stack is enabled, essentially what XD is doing is it's looking at the orientation of all the layers on an artboard. And it's going to notice that they're either going horizontal, left to right, or vertical, top to bottom. Now, in some cases like this, right, the majority of content, we have this group here of tags, we have this hot off the press section at the bottom. So the majority of the content is going up and down. But we also have some free floating content that's going left to right, right? So what does XD do in that situation? Well, XD is actually smart enough to figure this out. So when I turn a stack on, it's still going to define it as a vertical stack, top to bottom. But what it also noticed is that there's this section here of free floating content, and it all belongs to each other. So if you dive in here, take a look, it grouped that stuff for me, which is super cool, right? And now I can go ahead and move these back into the section if I want to, or I can keep it as is. Just to keep things organized, I'm going to do that and just rename this featured one more time. And of course, you can also have, just like we did before, we can have stacks within stacks. So I have this card selected. I'm going to turn on a stack. It's going to define it as a horizontal stack, and whoop, I can just move things around. And of course, because we now have a much larger stack, I can just shift all these elements as you would expect, right? So we have our stacks enabled, and now we want to start adding some additional content. Again, I want to add a banner right in this area up here. So I'm going to dive into this group, grab my rectangle, and draw one out. And you're noticing it's automatically pushing that content down, which is wonderful, right? Sam is saying, I love the colors, text on the white buttons with the drop shadow. Yeah, Sam, I see a 2021 trend, maybe. I mean, colored drop shadows have been there for a while, but I kind of like this gradiented rainbow type of thing. So we've got our banner, and I'm going to go ahead and round to the corners just a little bit. Now I want to take a look at some of the other rounded corners that I'm working on. So I have 16 over here. This should be also 16 as well. So to keep consistency, we're going to also set this at 16. You can do that in the Properties Inspector, or you can hold down one of these icons, little handles, and there we go. Mark is saying, shame they don't work in prototype mode. I believe you're probably referring to stacks, which I was just talking about. And that's something the team is definitely exploring. It's very much a different challenge to bring stacks to prototyping modes. And you know, thinking from a user's perspective, there are absolutely times where I wouldn't want a stack to work in prototype mode. So there would probably have to be some user interactions as well to get that working. But of course, you could still use stacks to help set up different states that do work in prototype mode. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. Okay, so we've got this banner, and I'm going to change the color so we can see what we're working with. And of course, I can hover my mouse and adjust the spacing in between items like this. Or if I hold down my shift key, I can adjust all the spacing at once, right? And if we take a look at our preview, we can scroll down. Now you're noticing down at the bottom, because we made the page a little bit larger, we'll have to go and make the artboard a little bit larger, right? Just like that. All right, so we've got this banner looking pretty good at the top, and now we want to start adding some content into it. So I'm gonna hop over to Finder, and I do have some covers that we've been working with. I also have some banners, and I'm thinking this one looks pretty fun, fancy, right? Or maybe even this one over here. Very colorful, very bright. There's a lot we can do with it. So I'm gonna pop this directly into place, double click to move it around, and that's pretty eye-catching, if I do say so myself, right? All right, so now on top of this particular banner, we may want some information to really shout out what this is, what the premium service is. So I'm gonna start by typing out, let's say the word. Now, what you're noticing, right? Unlimited. You're noticing, did I even spell that right? I probably did not. Unlimited. Maybe I did. What you're noticing is as I added that layer, right? It moved things around. And that's stacks at work. It's actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? When you add a layer inside of a group that contains a stack, it's going to automatically add it at the top or wherever you're dragging out a shape, right? So in this case, we don't want that. Now, if we wanted to just add a title up here, absolutely, we definitely want that. So to work around that, because that text layer that we're going to be creating belongs to or belongs with this particular banner, we're actually going to pop that into a group. I'm going to call this banner. I'm also going to do my best to rename some of these layers. Image, right? So now inside of this group, I can go ahead, grab the text layer one more time, or the text tool, unlimited, right? And we have no problems. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and choose. So this typeface was Proxima Nova that we've been using. We're going to go ahead and continue with that. Now, what you're probably also noticing is that this is very difficult to see and read, right? Very difficult. We've got white text on a very light background. That's definitely not going to pass any sort of accessibility. It's just going to cause a mess. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an overlay and maybe even a background blur, just to very similar to what we did with that hover effect down here, right? And also, kind of similar to what we did right up here. So we're kind of keeping consistency. So I'm going to hop in here to this image and I'm going to duplicate it. Command and Control D, and I don't need the image anymore. So I'm simply going to drop the color to black. Now, of course, I can go ahead and just grab the opacity and drag it over to the side. Looks okay. But I might want to get a little bit fancier. And of course, if you've watched streams before of mine, I love background blurs. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the background blur option right at the bottom of the properties inspector. Okay, it's a little bit more readable, but it's still not great, right? Someone saying, can you please state my name? Eshtam. I apologize. I'm not great with names, so if I mispronounced it, I do apologize. So yeah, it's a little bit more readable, but we want to make a few changes to this particular layer. One, we want to bring some of that visibility of the image back into play. So the background blur right now is set to 30. And if I increase it, of course, the whole thing gets blurred. Doesn't look too bad, right? But I want a little bit so that people can see that and recognize what this particular title is. So around 10 brings it back a little bit, right? Now, of course, it's a little bit too light, especially as we brought some of that blur down. So if I drop the brightness to 0, it's looking a little bit better, right? But we also want to bring some of that dark shade from the fill back into this particular layer, right? And that's where the effect opacity comes into play. And if I start bringing that up, literally what it's doing is it's taking the color from the fill, whether it's a color, solid color, a gradient, or whatever it might be, and it's bringing some of that back in. So if I leave it somewhere around, I don't know, let's say 55%, all of a sudden we have text that's much more legible, right? We can see it, we can read it. We also have a background that we can still see a little bit, but also, it's kind of hidden back there so that the text is readable. I can make it a little bit larger, and then we can add some additional layers. So maybe over here, we might put like reading access. Makes it a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll left justify it. Maybe we'll drop this down to extra bold, play around with the line height a little bit so it's not too spaced out. Pop this over here. Now it looks a little bit large compared to the unlimited text, so I can either make this a little bit larger like that, or I can make this a little bit smaller. right? And then adjust the line height as needed. Hopefully you can't all hear my clickety-clackety keyboard. I just got a new keyboard and it's very loud. Can you hear that? I need to do something about that. It's supposed to be a red switch, which is supposed to be a little bit quieter, but it's very loud. And then over here, maybe how many series, for example. So maybe there is 529 series. Now this one, so what I did here was I didn't hold down my caps lock key when I was typing this. Now, luckily, over in the Properties Inspector, I can go ahead and hit this icon right here to make it all uppercase, and then I may want to right justify it just like that. Make sure everything lines up, and it does, and there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and group all three of these text layers. This will just be called text or copy or whatever you might want to call it. You can hear my keyboard. Yeah, I got to do something about that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the center, and then we need some sort of call to action on this particular area, right? So maybe over to the right, we may just want a button that says become a premium member or something to that effect. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. I'm still in that group. I'm going to grab my rectangle, draw one out. Maybe I'll round out the corners a little bit. 16 might be too much for the, actually it's not too bad. It could work. We will try that. There we go. And then for the color, I want a nice actionable blue. I love the blue that we use on XD, so I'll just go ahead and sample that. Of course, if I had it in my layers panel or my assets, I can just pull that in. Now, what I'm noticing here, just kind of taking a look, and of course I would probably launch my preview as well, is that blue and the background clash a little bit. It's not terrible, but it definitely clashes a touch. So what I'm going to do for this particular button is just dive in, add a border, a nice white border on the inside, just to give a little bit extra separation between the button and the background. Of course, you can also add a drop shadow. We may get to that in a moment, but I'm thinking this looks pretty good. Let's try 32 pixels. So we got 44 from the top. Let's keep that consistent. Boop, there we go. And then on the inside, let's go ahead and just type out become premium. It's a little bit too large. I'm going to go ahead and drop that. Extra bold could potentially work. Let's see. Or do we want to try bold? We definitely want something in the bold range because this is a call to action. We do want people to see it. So bold or extra bold should work pretty nicely. All right. And then finally, the last thing I want to do is maybe over to the left-hand side of this banner, we may want maybe a card of some sort. Maybe when you become a premium member, you're granted some sort of a card, right? So, and that's going to go right in this area here. And let's actually design it on a separate artboard so we can use this later on. All right, so we've got our artboard card just like that, and grab the rectangle. Probably doesn't have to be exactly a credit card size, but this could probably do. Let's try 16 pixels again for the border. That's not too bad. Of course, when we do shrink down this card to have it fit on this particular banner, likely going to have to adjust that corner radius at some point. All right, so we've got this card over here, and we probably don't need a border in this particular case, but I may want a little bit of a texture. So if I hop over, where's Finder? Lost Finder. All right, here we go. If I hop over to Finder, I do have in this folder here a geometric pattern. I believe I actually made this using a repeat grid at some point. But if I drop this into this shape here, it looks okay, right? But I'm thinking I want a darker feel to this particular card, but I also want to bring in some of this texture. So in this case, I have this background, right? I'm going to duplicate it. And then on this shape here, I want to add in this texture. And what this is going to allow me to do, it's going to allow me to change the blend mode to something like overlay. Now, if you look closely, you can kind of see some of that texture popping on in, right? And of course, you can change the blend mode. You can experiment with blend mode. Soft light's not bad actually, and hard light, it's a little bit too harsh. But what you can also do is experiment with the background color. So if I change this to, let's say, a radial gradient, for example, then we can start focusing on different areas of this texture. So in the middle, we might want to go for this color here, and then maybe on the edges, maybe a little bit darker, for example, just to bring a little bit of light to the middle. You can even add a little bit of color as well, right? So you can just experiment with these sorts of things until you get something that looks pretty fancy. Soft light, overlay. Ooh, overlay's kind of, it almost has like a little velvety feel to it, right? Kind of fancy. All right, so we've got our card, and actually I'm gonna make a little change to, now that I'm zooming out, I might wanna just expand this a little bit so that the radial gradient isn't too harsh. And then on the inside of this, we may just want some simple text that says premium of some sort, and maybe also the logo. So I'm gonna grab this logo that we've been working with, pop it over here. And what you're definitely noticing is because the card is darker in style and we have some dark text, it's clashing a little bit. So I'm gonna dive in and we're gonna change this to white. The red kind of works, so I think we might keep with that. This one we're gonna change to white, but because this is the particle in this particular text layer, I'm going to just drop the opacity to maybe 30%. So it brings in some of that color in the background and it's not a focus, right? And then right underneath, we might just want to type out premium. Now we don't want to use this typeface. I'm going to go back to Proxima Nova. Let's change this to a nice extra bold or black, one of these two, and then shift it to white. And I'm just going to make sure that it lines up relatively nicely right about there. Extra black might be too thick. Extra bold might work. All right. I'm gonna bring down the opacity a little bit and then tweak this just a touch. Just to get it exactly where I'm looking for. This is like 90% of the things that I do all day. It's just like tweak one color, then tweak another color, and then, right? Is it possible to change the color of Smart Guide and Guides? It is not, but I would like to see that at some point. That would be nice. I'm also gonna go ahead and add a little bit of a border on the inside of this shape. Drop the opacity a little bit. That way, if there is something going on in the background behind this particular card, we'll be able to see it. And of course, you can add a shadow as well, but we're gonna stick with this. Maybe I will make this a little bit thinner. Soft light, yeah, okay, that could work. All right, it's not the fanciest looking card in the world, but it could work. I'm gonna group it, call this card, and we can also turn it into a component if we want to, if we're gonna be using it across multiple screens, and we may, right? So we can just Command and Control K to turn that into a component. Car says, name your layers. Indeed. So now if I hop over here into my banner group, I'm gonna paste this. Now, of course, what you're gonna notice is as I'm moving this inside or out, or above or below the group, things are moving as you would expect. So we're gonna make this a little bit smaller. Drag that down. Now, of course, things are happening. So I'm gonna make sure that responsive resize, we probably don't need responsive resize in this particular design. There we go. And I might wanna rotate a little bit, just like that, and maybe kind of hang it off the side here. There we go. And I can dive in here and, I think I might want a bit of a shadow. So I'm gonna add a shadow, crank up the Y value, crank up the blur, and then start experimenting with the opacity. Maybe I'll even add a little bit of purple in here. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Let's go ahead and preview, see what that looks like. It's looking okay. That border is definitely a little bit too harsh at the moment, so I'm gonna drop that down to about, let's say 20%. I know, Kara. I just think it's, I completely agree. Naming layers is so important. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on a document and then I'll just look at the new rectangle or new group that I created and it's like rectangle 4,920, right? We all do it. And I try my best on these streams to, thanks for hanging out, Mark. All right, so yeah, try my best on these streams to name my layers as best as possible. Alrighty. So things are looking pretty good with this homepage. Pretty happy with it. All right, so we are going to move on. I'm gonna move the card over to this area here. And on an artboard over here, over to the right, we want to start really showcasing and highlighting what the individual book experience may look like. Now, of course, I could go ahead and duplicate this artboard over here, but there's so much, I mean, yeah, I definitely will do that, but there's so much content here that probably don't need half of it, right? So I'm gonna actually turn off the stack for now, because as I'm designing these things, I wanna be able to add a stack later on, but really focus on creating the layers and the groups now, and then worry about organization a little bit later. Don't need that, probably don't need that, don't need that. So we're basically, I probably don't need even the tags, right? So we basically just need a tag, the navigation bar at the top. So this I'm gonna call book. And what I'm thinking for this particular page is, at the top, we're gonna have a nice large banner, and then we're gonna have the book and then some information about the particular book, right? So let's go ahead and start with that. We do have our guides that we can drag out. I'm also I wanna add a little bit of breathing room on this page, and I probably should have done that on the other pages as well, but we're gonna run with this. All right, so we want a nice large banner at the top. I'm gonna go ahead and press the R key to go into my rectangle tool, draw one out right about here. I do want, again, to keep consistency, I do want rounded corners on this particular banner, so I'm gonna round them out. Let's try out 16. There we go. That could work. And then on the inside of this banner, let's go ahead and grab, we want to grab this, okay, we'll grab the same one. Drag that in there and pop it in place. Perfect. All right, so now on top of this banner, we want a few things probably. Over here to the right, we might want the cover of this particular book. So with the rectangle, one more time, I'm going to drag one out. We will round out the corners again. We'll keep the border for now. We definitely will have a border, but we're going to tweak it at some point. And then let's go back to covers. I want something a little bit different that's not this. It may not match up, but we're going to drag in, what else do we have? We have some covers, banners. All right, we're just going to grab any of these. It's probably not, I definitely know it's not the same book, but we're going to run with that. And then because it's sitting on top of this colorful banner, we may want a little bit of separation there. So I'm going to turn on a border over within the Properties Inspector, a white border, increase the size a little bit. Let's try 6 pixels. And then I want a bit of a shadow, very subtle shadow, very similar to what we've been doing in some of the other areas. And if you've watched many of my streams, you know I talk about shadows all the time. The one thing you don't want to do is this, right? You don't want to do this. This is ugly. It's just a sore thumb, right? If you take a look at this, it just stands out. And even though you want people to look in this direction to see the cover, it's just, right? So you can achieve the same effect of creating separation between this layer and the layers behind it with very soft, subtle shadows. So if I go ahead in the shadow properties down here, I'm gonna increase the Y value a little bit more. Let's try 12. It's just bringing that shadow down a little bit. I'm gonna really crank up the blur to have a nice soft shadow. Let's try 24, we can always adjust that. But the main thing you wanna focus on, because if you take a look here, it still stands out way too much. You want to just grab the shadow opacity and drag it on down. You can even add a little bit of color, maybe a little bit of blue in here, just a little bit, right? And then experiment with the Y value, maybe move it down a touch more, blur it just a touch more as well. And then experiment again with the colors and the opacity. So if you take a look now, we still have that separation between that shape and the background layers, but we don't have this very ugly shadow that's going to stand out and catch people's attention for all the wrong reasons. So I think this could work, right? All right, so we've got this cover, and I'm thinking, possibly in some situations, this banner at the top may be a little bit too distracting. So just like we did on these examples here, we may just want a little bit of an overlay. So I'm going to duplicate this, and in the background, I'm going to change this color to black. Even though this overlay is behind, it's not really an overlay, it's an underlay. I don't know. Is that a word? I don't know. It is now. And then I'm going to drop the opacity. Right? So the banner's there, but it's really bringing focus to the cover. which is right over here to the left. So if you take a look at the difference, right? 100% opacity, it all kind of blends together, and then something like 40% or 30% opacity. All of a sudden, that shadow or that cover that we're kind of trying to focus on is a lot more easier to see, right? All right, so we've got our banner, we've got our cover. Now over to the right, we might want some information about this particular book. So I'm gonna grab the text tool and I'm gonna type out, oops, I should probably change that to a darker color. And it's all gonna be placeholder text at the moment. So I'll put book title. Extra bold might be a little bit too much. So let's drop that to bold, possibly. Extra bold, I don't know, let's see. Bold, extra, ooh, maybe extra bold. I think that could potentially work. I'm going to drop the size a little bit. Whoops, make sure to left justify this. And then right down below, we may want some secondary information about this particular book. If you go on Amazon and Barnes & Noble or any of these book websites that sell books, there's always a little bit of information about, you know, how many pages, who the author is, and that sort of thing. So here I'm going to type out, let's say, I don't know, 291 pages. Now, because this is secondary information, we want to make a few different changes. Let me actually add a little bit more story by, and then maybe the author here, right? So again, this is secondary, and we have a lot of content on this particular section. So we might also want published by publisher. So there's a lot going on here, right? So what we're gonna do first, we're gonna drag this down and make it quite a bit smaller. Let's try 24 and see what that looks like. And we also want to bring down the weight as well. So instead of extra bold, we might wanna go for a simple regular, possibly. And then for the majority of the content here, we may not want the same color, the same very dark color. So let's just bring this up a little bit. You can also darken or drop the opacity as well to get a very similar effect. That could work. And then possibly, you know, if you're going to be using links and things like that, what I'm going to do here is just select this, and then I'm going to set this to blue and then underline it, just to give the impression that this could be a link, right, when the website's actually published. Now, what you can also do, here's another fun tip, is I have this text layer selected, and there's a few different styles inside of this text layer. So over within my assets, under character styles, I can press the plus button, and it's gonna automatically add all the character styles that are being used in this particular text layer, right? So it's adding the gray text with no outline or underline. It's also adding the blue text, which does have an underline. So if I dive in here and select just the publisher here text, I can go ahead and click on that newly created character style. It's going to apply it to that selected text layer, which is wonderful, right? All right, so we've got some information here, and then maybe down below, possibly a star rating. You know, every product that we can possibly think of has some sort of rating. So in this case, we're going to grab our polygon tool, shortcut key Y. You can also grab it in the tools bar to the left, drag one out. Now, of course, by default, it's a nice triangle, that's what it is. It's a triangle. It's been a long day. I don't know my shapes anymore. I should bring my daughter in here. She knows her shapes. All right, so we want a star, right? So over in the Properties Inspector, I'm gonna change the number of sides to 5. Nope, do I want 6, 5, 6? I don't know. And then I'm gonna adjust the star area right over here. That looks pretty good. I think we're gonna run with this. And if you want to, you can also round to the corners a little bit. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, so I'm gonna keep it pretty sharp, right? Just like that. And we want basically 2 separate elements for this star rating. We want one of all 5 stars that, you know, kind of hides in the background, right? And then you want the active stars. So for this one, we're gonna change this to a nice gray color, just like that. And this is a great opportunity to use a repeat grid. Let me try rounding again. Now, see, the rounded corners are a little bit weird. They're not terrible. 1.5. Okay, that could work. All right, so what we want to do is, with 1 star selected, Command and Control R to enter or to create a repeat grid, drag one out. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to bring them back. And again, As I always stress, if you're designing very much zoomed in like I'm doing now, just hit the preview button at the top, just so you can see how things are looking. And also, if you have a secondary monitor, you can actually launch your preview, put it on your other monitor, right? Just so that as you're designing, so I'll put it here just so you can see it. As I'm designing, it's updating in real time. So you can kind of see a zoomed in view and a zoomed out view at the same time. All right, so we've got our 5 stars. These are the inactive stars. And now we want to show how many actual stars this has. So I'm going to duplicate this. Actually, let me rename some of these. These will be called stars. And then I'm going to duplicate, Command and Control D, active stars. And then for here, we want to change the fill to a nice red color. Maybe I'll add a little bit of pink in there. And then we can actually use the repeat grid handle to set how many stars. So 4.5 stars, for example, or 3.5 stars, right? So it's masking out everything outside of that repeat grid that we're dragging back. And that looks pretty good, right? And then over to the right, we might just want to, let's say, I don't know, how many ratings? 90 ratings. Makes it a little bit smaller like that. Let's try 16. Let's actually sample this color here. It could work, potentially. I think it's a little bit too light. Drag it down. Let's try medium. Oh, we don't have a medium. Semi-bold? Nope, don't like that. All right, let's go back to regular. I don't want to stress too much about these little tiny things, right? All right, so next thing we might want is possibly some buttons right in this area here. So you can become a premium member, or possibly you can just purchase it outright. Now, if you remember, inside of our hover state over here, we have these buttons that we've already created. And in here, they are not components, but we can absolutely create them as components, right? Now, in an ideal world, I think I might have done this during last stream, is this one here would be the main component, and then you would have your outline state as a subcomponent, or a state within that component. So let's go ahead and actually do that on this artboard here. So I'm gonna grab my rectangle, drag one out, just like that, and this is going to be the main call to action. Basically, the main thing that you want users to do. Let's go ahead and try 8 pixels for the rounded corners. I'm gonna make this nice blue. Probably don't need a border in this particular case, right? And then on the inside, this is gonna be the button to sign up as a premium member. So I'm gonna make sure that this is nice and bold. Let's try 24 pixels. That might be a little bit too large, but let's go ahead and check that out. That's not bad, actually. I think that could potentially work. So we have our first button created, and what we want to do now is create additional buttons that are linked to this particular one, right? So I'm going to make sure to select both of these layers here, and then within my Properties Inspector over to the right, or you can do this in your Libraries panel under your Assets, I'm going to press the plus button to create a component, and this is going to be the default state. And now I want an additional state that will act as a secondary button. So I'm going to choose New State, Secondary. And now that that's created, I'm going to dive in here, and there's a lot of different ways you can create secondary buttons. You can drop the color like this and maybe play around with the color here, right? So this can be a secondary button, right? Then you can also do, let's say, an outline button. So dive in here, I'll turn off the fill, I'll set a border color somewhere right about here. Maybe increase the size of that border a little bit, and then the text, I'm actually going to use the exact same color. So I'm going to use my eyedropper, sample that color, or of course, if you have that in your assets, you can do that as well. How do we spell this new sounds Howard's going with? It's like, yeah, I know, I make a lot of sound effects when I'm designing. Even when I'm not streaming, I make sound effects. So we've got our 3 states. We have our default state, our secondary state, and our outline state. Now I can drag out an additional button right here and then choose whichever one I want. So outlined like that. And then this might just say, oops, I should center that. Purchase, and maybe it's like $9.99. There we go. And the beauty of all this is I have all these secondary states, right? But they still remain linked back to the original. So if I needed to change the styling of these buttons across my entire project and across all the states, I can just dive in and make changes like that, and it pushes them as you would expect. David says, XD needs a swap fill border color button as per Photoshop and InDesign. That would be nice. I know there's a lot of smaller quality of life changes coming to designing at some point this year, obviously, you know, the years to come, but that would be nice. All right, so I've got my buttons, and I'm gonna go ahead and I should probably name these. Premium, and this one is Purchase. I'm gonna group these two buttons together, call this button, and then I'm gonna turn on another stack. I can use stacks all day, right? So that way, if I needed to, I can always swap these around like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I do want to fill in some more information on this area here. Particularly, I might want a little bit of a description about this series. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my text tool. We're going to start with a very simple header, and I'm going to go ahead and let's say about this series. Make sure to left justify it, line it up right about here. And then underneath, I want some, maybe a larger text area, maybe with auto height text. So I'm gonna grab my text tool. Instead of simply clicking, I'm gonna click and drag, maybe to this area here. Maybe I'll snap it to this spot. I mean, it doesn't really matter if it's an auto height text, right? Which is this second icon right here. So what you're gonna notice is as I'm typing, oops, what did I do? Whew, drag one out. I'm basically worried about the width of this, right? So as I'm typing, my Amenia, that doesn't even make sense. My name is Howard and I am, right? So in this case, I didn't have enough text to go all, I could have kept typing, right? But let me go ahead and bring this on back. And now what you're gonna notice as I get to the end, right? It automatically resizes, which is great. I'm gonna go ahead and place in some placeholder text. Now, because this is more of a description, right? We probably don't want the same bold look. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure these are lined up, and I'm just going to drop this to regular. And where did this text come from? That doesn't work. Okay, go ahead and drag this out. I grabbed placeholder text from a random thing and it just didn't work. All right, let's go ahead and description of this project, or this book, I should say, goes here. And what else? I hope you're all not hearing my keyboard. You probably are though. What else am I gonna put here? More information about this project, and characters will be here. This doesn't make any sense, but we're gonna run with it. It's better than the description that I randomly copied. All right, so we've got our description looking pretty good. I know, I just went to some random website and grabbed some sample text, and I probably should not have done that. All right, we're gonna pop this right about here, and then we may want, just to kind of pull in some of the genres and tags that we've been using, we may wanna wrap things up right about here, just to kind of bring some of those in. So now what we can do is, so someone's asking, is unlimited access need more attention than purchase? So, you know, it definitely, you know, it's up to you, right? It depends on what the main point of this particular service is, right? In this case, I'm envisioning that unlimited access, the premium membership, is probably the thing that this website wants to push the most. And purchase is more of a secondary option. But of course, if purchase is the primary option, you would just kind of move this, whoops. What did I do? You would just move this up, right? And you can switch back to the default state and just change the text as necessary, right? All right, let me go ahead and dive in here. I'm actually going to grab one of these tags. Pop that about here. Now this is way too big, so I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. The shadow is way too big as well. Bring that back. It's not bad. I think there's too much attention to something. Something is just standing out. Maybe let's round out these corners. Oh, I converted it to a path by mistake. Oh no, let me undo that. Round out those corners. Let's sample one of these colors. Bring that up a little bit. Let's add a little bit of a shadow. Again, very subtle shadow, bring up the blur, Add a little bit of blue in there just because we can, right? Nope, I don't like that at all. Okay, that could work. It'll do, pig. It'll do. All right, so we've got one of our tags looking okay, and what I'm gonna do, let me just bring this up a little bit, there we go. And I'm gonna group these, and create a repeat grid, and there we go. Perfect, all right, so this is coming along. Let me go ahead and change this a little bit. It's a little bit squishy. So what we can do, very similar to what we did earlier, is start using stacks, right? Now, I may want these two objects to stay together at all times and not really be affected by if I change the stack, all at once. I don't want those to also change. So I'm gonna group these. This will be called, let's say, book info. These are pretty good, these are good, these are not groups, so I want to make sure to group all of these just like that. These will be called stars. This is fine, and this is fine. So I'm going to select all this information, pop this into a group. I'll just call this metadata, and then I'm going to turn on a stack, which is going to define it as vertical. So now I can very easily swap things around if I need to. Now, what you're probably noticing here is that XD automatically grouped these two layers. And that's because the text was overlapping just a little bit. So if I ungroup this, it's gonna automatically push it down for me. I can adjust the spacing like that. There we go. All right, I think that will do. Something looks off. I think the navigation is maybe too close, or it's too large, or something looks off. Move that down a little bit. Maybe I'll space these out just a little bit more. Let's try 16. And then I'm gonna move these over a touch as well, just to give a little bit more breathing room. And there we go. All right, now the final thing we might wanna do is over to the right, we may want a very simple bookmark icon, for example. So I'm going to I'll draw it out manually. I'm gonna grab my rectangle, draw one out just like this. And this is definitely not gonna be a focal point. So we're going to set this color to maybe like a very light color with a very light border. I'm gonna round out the corners just a little bit. Let's try 16 again. It might be, yeah, 16 is way too much. Let's try 8. And then on the inside of this, I might want an icon and maybe some text as well. So let me try the text, bookmark. And then over to the left, we might want a bookmark icon. So I'm gonna hop into my plugins right down here at the bottom left-hand corner. And I do have the icons for design plugin installed. I'm gonna go ahead and type out bookmark. And there we go. We've got a nice border-based book. Whoop. Yeah, for some reason, this plugin just kind of pops these icons wherever it pleases. So let's go back over here. I'm gonna copy it, pop it over here. Now this is a border-based icon. So as I'm making this smaller, that border is remaining consistent. So it's looking a little bit thicker, right? So I'm gonna just drop this down to about 1 pixel. Let's sample this color. Might be too dark, but we're gonna try it out. It's not too bad. I think it's a little too dark. All right. There we go. It's looking a little bit better. Now, of course, if you wanted to go the extra mile, you can also create a component out of this and create the various states. So I'm gonna go ahead and press the plus button beside component. This is our default state, which is not bookmarked. And then we might have a bookmark state, which maybe the background is this lovely blue that we've been using. Maybe this will be white. And this will be white as well. Or maybe this will be filled in, actually. We can fill this in. And then change this to bookmarked. Make sure this is centered. And there we go. Oh, you know what? I didn't even create a new state. I am off today. Let's undo this. So we've got our state, or main state. New state. This is going to be called Bookmark. And then very quickly, let's rush through this, because Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few moments. You're not going to want to miss that. There we go, bookmarked. And it'll do. That will do. And then fill this in. All right, so default state, bookmark state, and now what we can do very quickly, we can wire this up for a tap trigger. We don't need any sort of fancy auto animate. We're gonna go ahead and choose the bookmark state. No auto animate, dissolve, and then boop, we've got our bookmarked, right? There we go. All right, so someone's saying, what if bookmark only, not bookmark, but hover says it? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways you can definitely go about this, but that is going to wrap it up for today. I'm gonna head out of here. Stick around in just a few moments. Kyle T. Webster's coming up with an illustration masterclass. Always a good time. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I will see you all next time.